The world stands on edge, gripped by a sense of uncertainty and fear that hasn't been felt in decades. Across continents, people are glued to their screens, anxiously following every development, as the specter of a catastrophic global conflict looms larger than ever before. Fearing a catastrophic global conflict, citizens everywhere are bracing for what could become a defining moment in modern history. The tension is palpable, with families, communities, and entire nations holding their breath, hoping for a peaceful resolution but preparing for the worst. President Donald Trump has issued a grave and urgent warning about the potential for World War III, his words echoing through newsrooms and government halls around the globe. His tone is somber, his message unmistakable. The world is closer to the brink than it has been in generations. Speaking from the White House in July 2025, Trump declared that escalating hostilities in the Middle East have brought the world closer to major war than ever before. He described the situation as the most dangerous moment for humanity since the Cold War, warning that the decisions made in the coming days could shape the fate of millions. The immediate catalyst is the rapidly deteriorating situation between Israel and Iran, which has erupted into direct military confrontations. Missiles have been launched, airstrikes exchanged, and the world watches as the conflict threatens to spiral out of control, drawing in neighboring countries and destabilizing the entire region. Trump's warning is more than rhetoric. It's a stark acknowledgement that this regional battle could trigger a domino effect, drawing in the US, Russia, and others. The risk of escalation is real, with military alliances and rivalries threatening to ignite a much broader and deadlier confrontation. By framing the crisis as an existential threat, Trump aims to rally support at home and abroad, pressuring allies and adversaries alike. He calls for unity among Western nations, urging them to stand firm against aggression, while also warning rivals that any miscalculation could have irreversible consequences. The ongoing war in Ukraine has already strained global relations, pushing the world order to its limits. Now, with the Middle East erupting, a second major front threatens to merge with the first, creating a volatile and unpredictable situation that could engulf multiple continents in conflict. Trump's message is clear: the world is at a tipping point, and the consequences of inaction could be catastrophic. He urges world leaders to act decisively, warning that hesitation or complacency could lead to devastation on a scale not seen since the world wars of the 20th century. All eyes are now on Washington, Moscow, and other capitals, as the world waits to see if diplomacy can avert disaster. The coming days will test the resolve, wisdom, and unity of the international community as humanity stands at the crossroads of peace and war. For decades, the rivalry between Israel and Iran simmered beneath the surface, shaping the Middle East through covert operations, proxy conflicts, sabotage missions, and relentless cyber attacks. Both nations waged a shadow war, rarely confronting each other directly, but always seeking to undermine the other's influence and capabilities. This hidden struggle played out in distant battlefields, from Syria to Lebanon, and in the digital realm, where hackers targeted critical infrastructure and intelligence networks. Now that shadow war has erupted into open conflict. Israeli airstrikes have targeted Iranian nuclear facilities with unprecedented intensity, while Iran has responded with waves of missiles and drones striking deep into Israeli territory. The scale and frequency of these attacks have shocked the world, signaling a dangerous new phase in their long-standing feud. The human cost has been devastating. Hundreds of civilians and soldiers have lost their lives, and both governments have broadened their military objectives. With each escalation, the possibility of a diplomatic solution slips further away, as trust erodes and demands harden. Israel is now determined to dismantle Iran's entire missile program, seeing it as an existential threat. Meanwhile, Iran's missile barrages have proven more sophisticated and destructive than many analysts predicted, catching Israeli defenses off guard and raising fears of further escalation. Civilian neighborhoods have borne the brunt of the violence, with families forced into bomb shelters and communities left in ruins. The suffering has fueled public outrage, leading to mass protests and deepening the resolve of leaders on both sides to continue fighting. International efforts to broker peace have so far fallen short. A brief US-brokered ceasefire offered a glimmer of hope, but failed to address the core issues: Iran's nuclear ambitions and Israel's deep-seated security fears. The underlying tensions remain unresolved. Direct clashes between Israeli and Iranian forces have only deepened mutual animosity. Each new battle, each act of retaliation, pushes the prospect of peace further out of reach as hatred and suspicion grow on both sides. The risk of a catastrophic miscalculation looms large. A single mistake or unexpected escalation could reignite the conflict with even greater ferocity, drawing in regional and global powers. As the world watches anxiously, the Middle East stands on the edge of a wider war, one that could spiral out of control and reshape the region for generations to come. As violence escalates, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu and Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei have dug in, leaving little room for compromise. Netanyahu frames the conflict as a fight for Israel's survival, vowing to eliminate Iran's nuclear and missile threats with Trump's backing. Khamenei in turn rejects all demands, rallying Iranians around resistance and warning the US of dire consequences if it intervenes. Both leaders speak to domestic audiences, reinforcing narratives of existential struggle and making diplomatic solutions nearly impossible. Their unyielding positions lock their nations into a collision course, fueling a fire that threatens to engulf the region. The Trump administration has chosen a strategy of maximum pressure, combining aggressive rhetoric, sweeping sanctions, and bold military posturing to confront Iran head-on. This approach marks a dramatic escalation in U.S. policy, signaling to both allies and adversaries that Washington is prepared to go further than ever before to achieve its objectives. President Trump has repeatedly hinted at the possibility of a U.S. military strike targeting Iran's nuclear program, keeping Tehran and the world on edge. These veiled threats, amplified by the deployment of advanced weaponry, have created an atmosphere of uncertainty and heightened anxiety across the region. The White House has issued a series of unprecedented demands, including Iran's unconditional surrender and even the evacuation of Tehran, pushing diplomatic boundaries and escalating the crisis to new heights. These ultimatums have left Iranian leaders scrambling to respond while protests erupt in the streets. In a show of force, U.S. military assets, including warships, fighter jets, and ground forces, have been rapidly deployed to the region. This massive buildup is meant to signal not just readiness, but a willingness to take direct action if provoked. The administration's stated goal is clear: to dismantle Iran's nuclear and missile programs, cripple its military infrastructure, and end its influence throughout the Middle East. Officials argue that only overwhelming pressure can force Iran to change course. However, critics warn that this uncompromising approach leaves little room for negotiation or diplomacy, and could easily spiral out of control. Many fear that by closing the door to dialogue, the administration is increasing the risk of a catastrophic war, one that could engulf the entire region. By aligning closely with Israel's hardline stance, the U.S. is not only isolating Iran, but also forcing a decisive confrontation. This partnership has emboldened hawks on both sides, making compromise seem ever more distant. The region now finds itself in a hair-trigger environment, where any miscalculation or provocation could ignite a conflict with global consequences. The world watches anxiously as tensions mount, fearing that a single spark could set off a devastating chain reaction. Trump's high-stakes gamble is that overwhelming force and relentless pressure will compel Iran to back down. But with so much at stake, the risks of miscalculation and unintended escalation have never been higher. Iran has responded to U.S. and Israeli threats with unified defiance, vowing to resist any aggression. Supreme Leader Khamenei calls for national unity, promising a crushing response to any attack. Iran's diplomats reject negotiations under threat, labeling Trump a warmonger and defending their actions as self-defense. Tehran threatens to disrupt global oil supplies and activate proxy forces across the region if attacked. External pressure has rallied Iranians, fostering unity despite internal challenges. Iran's leadership is determined to endure, believing resistance is the only way to preserve sovereignty. Russia, a key ally of Iran, has issued stern warnings against U.S. military intervention, calling it a path to global catastrophe. Foreign Minister Lavrov warns a U.S. strike could destabilize the region and risk nuclear disaster. While Russia is unlikely to intervene militarily, its resources tied up in Ukraine, it uses its UN position to shield Iran diplomatically. The crisis has benefited Moscow, diverting attention from Ukraine and boosting Russian oil revenues. Russia seeks to prevent a U.S.-Iran war, but also exploits the chaos to challenge American dominance. Lavrov contrasts Trump's realism with Biden's hegemonic agenda, hinting at possible common ground despite current tensions. Russia continues to maneuver, advancing its interests amid the turmoil. The Israel-Iran conflict has revived fears of nuclear war, with the International Atomic Energy Agency losing track of Iran's enriched uranium. Israeli strikes have blinded inspectors, creating dangerous uncertainty about Iran's nuclear capabilities. Some experts warn that attacks may push Iran to secretly pursue nuclear weapons for deterrence. The fighting has occurred near active nuclear sites, raising the risk of a catastrophic accident. The doomsday clock ticks closer to midnight as arms control breaks down and nuclear threats escalate. International bodies scramble to regain control, demanding access and a halt to hostilities near nuclear facilities. Russia, China, and Pakistan call for emergency UN action to address the nuclear crisis. The world is on high alert, fearing the nuclear threshold could be crossed. As war looms, the international community is fractured and struggling to respond. European powers push for emergency talks with Iran, but the US pursues its own hardline strategy, weakening global unity. The UN Security Council is paralyzed by divisions, unable to enforce a ceasefire or political settlement. China, Russia, and Pakistan urge restraint, fearing economic and security fallout from a wider war. Nations are forced to choose sides or walk a diplomatic tightrope, deepening global polarization. The path to peace demands immediate de-escalation and genuine diplomacy, an increasingly unlikely prospect. The world waits, hoping for diplomacy before the drums of war become deafening.